All right, welcome to the March 13th CNAB Public Development Meeting. The agenda is here. I just pasted it into the chat window of the HackMD document that we use to keep track of the schedule. And so typically we start off by allowing anybody who's new to either introduce themselves out loud or write something quickly in chat to introduce themselves. Then we do some demos after that. Today we've got Carolyn doing a Porter plus JSON schema demo, and then we dive into some of the content for things we want to make sure that we get done. Kind of the highest priority for the day is to make sure, given the time frames and that many CNAB kinds of demos and things will be shown in very late April and May. Like the entire month of May is going to be nonstop CNAB demos at different conferences, I think. So we want to make sure, and we've committed to getting the spec into a position this week where we can consider it maybe not frozen, but we can at least consider backward compatibility breaking changes to be frozen from now until June when we revisit things. So that's kind of our large goal at the end of today. Would anybody like to introduce themselves? All right, we will proceed then and go ahead and kick off the demo section. Carolyn, go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Hey, everybody. I'm Carolyn Van Slyke. I work at Microsoft, in case you haven't met me, and I work on Porter. So what I'd like to show today is the Porter manifest, porter.yaml. And what's fun about this is we have IntelliSense now. Woo! So we have a little squiggle here. So obviously I've done something wrong already. And if I hover over it, it says we're missing Mixins because Porter is all about Mixins. So I'm all about red squiggle development. So I'm going to type in Mixins. And it knows that Mixins is an array. But I don't really know what to type. So I'm going to be like, what should I put in here? So I'm going to be like, Azure. Darn you, demo. Why aren't you working? Let's see what's going on here. So what's happening is VS Code is actually driving all of its IntelliSense off of Porter itself. So if I type Porter schema, and I look at it through less here, Porter talks to every single one of the Mixins that are on disk and gets the JSON schema for every single one and kind of not quite concatenates it together, but makes like a composite JSON schema out of all of it. And it gets kind of ginormous and ugly. JSON schema is kind of huge. Let's see if we can go actually all the way down to the end here. And you'll see a couple things that maybe look a little bit familiar, like Mixins is an enum of Azure, the exec mixin or the helm mixin, or there's an installation step in Porter, and it could be an installation step for Azure, it could be an installation step for exec or helm, and all of this works off of that. So VS Code, what it does is it runs Porter under the hood and does this all off of the JSON schema. So let's try this one more time. Come on. Let's try this. There we go. When in doubt, restart. So now it's giving me a little bit of auto completion here. So I don't know what to type, so I'm just going to like install. Okay, perfect. So I know that one of the ones I can do is helm. I can do exec. So I'm going to do exec. And it's going to fill in for me the required, there's a little bit of a bug. It doesn't quite have the indentation right. There we go. It'll give me the required properties. So the command, I'm going to be like, I want to run bash. I'm going to say hi. And then I can pass in some arguments. I'm going to do -c, and I'm going to do echo hi. And then I could do one more. Let's do helm, for example. Oops. It's a little flaky. Some of this is the Red Hat YAML plugin that we use under the hood. I've got a couple issues I'm going to open up here to kind of figure out why we don't always get magical autocomplete. We do get red squiggles most of the time though, but so we're still working on this. There we go. There's my autocomplete again. I'm not quite sure why it comes and goes, but we're getting there. So we look at that. It's missing one of my properties. This should help us help the community come up with new mixins over time. And as long as you implement that schema command, you don't have to. If you don't, it just doesn't show up inside the IntelliSense. But if you do, as you're writing things in VS Code, you should be able to get this IntelliSense and help you out as you try to write things. You don't have to try to remember all the various things you need to do. So it's not quite groundbreaking, but it should help. And then the other piece of this is that as Porter loads up manifests and talks to Mixins and sends information back and forth with Mixins, it's going to start validating against this so that we don't send malformed things back and forth and just try to make it work at runtime. We're actually going to make sure that we stop things as soon as we realize there's a problem. So, are there any questions?
Hey, Carolyn, this is Josh.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the Mixins, like you had the 3 different Mixins that were available, but you could technically install your own Mixin, right? Like a custom.
Yeah, that's right.
And does that reflect in the schema then?
Yeah, so let me show this one more, let me just share real quick. So if the Mixin, so let me just like CD into like the Porter directory real quick. Okay, so I've got a couple Mixins here that are installed. I have Azure exec, whatever. So if I CD into the Helm directory and I do Helm has a schema command. Okay, and let's just put it through blast real quick so it's not overwhelming. If your Mixin has this, you'll get to have IntelliSense and you'll get validated against things. If you don't have it, then it's just a lot more loosey-goosey, you know? Eventually it's going to be required as part of a Mixin that you have to have this command. But kind of just finished this yesterday, so we're not restrict yet.
No, that's awesome. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I'm working on doc today that explains what that schema needs to look like, obviously, because in order to merge it all together and have that look right and validate properly, it needs to look a certain way too. There's some rules.
There's one question in the chat from Radu.
Yeah, how can you generate a schema for your Mixin? I actually just make mine by hand. There's Go libraries that try to generate schema for you as well. Because it depends how much you trust them. I found like 1,000,001 different ways to make a schema that doesn't work well with, like it works with the online validator, but it doesn't work with like the library that is used by VS Code, but it does work with the Go library, but it doesn't work with like the YAML library. Like there's so many different incompatibilities that like, honestly, I would write it by hand for now. I don't know, there's a reason why this feature took me a month. I'd be ashamed to say that, but there are so many quirks. It's like, let's be honest, it's, I don't know, I wouldn't try to generate it. We had a feature in the backlog to generate it, and we said, it's probably not a good idea. Sorry, Josh.
So the takeaway lesson on that is, as a group of people trying to figure out how to write a standard, iterating quickly like JSON schema might not be the best option for us. Might introduce conflict into our...
Yeah, it's just kind of weird because there is a spec for JSON schema. It's just either it's a combination of bugs or quirks in how various libraries interpreted things, or how far a college student decided to implement that spec. I don't know, like, this is VS Code. We're recorded. Maybe I should, whatever. I don't care. like VS Code is Microsoft, right? But we use an extension that is written by a college student, and it's like we either need to adopt it and bring it up to snuff, or we maybe need to be using a different extension for some of these things, because it's tying our hands in how much of the JSON schema we can fully use. Yeah. Carolyn, never let her into a PR related event. I'm going to be quiet now.
All right. Anything else on any other questions on the demo?
I just know that Gareth's got some experience with JSON schema stuff, to put him on the spot, and Sivan did some of the Docker app stuff. So they may have some feedback, or if you want to chat to people who've done this before, or similar things before.
You just got volunteered to voluntold to help, Gareth, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So the next major thing to talk about on the schedule is whether we have satisfied the requirements for what we need in this kind of May timeframe. So the way we tried to approach this, just as a reminder, is we tried to break the specification out into 4 related specifications. The main one is CNAB Core 1.0 Working Draft. That's the one that we're going to be talking about today. And that one defines basically the CNAB bundle, its structure, the JSON format, and things like that. Then we had 3 related ones that are not things that we've committed to getting done right away. Those are the registry spec, which is not even in rough draft shape, the claim spec, which is actually coming along pretty well, and the security spec, which is in kind of an early rough draft state. So those 3 are where we'll start transferring some of the spec work as the core schema sort of irons out. So the main thing we want to make sure that we come away from this meeting clear on is what is left to do in the core spec that could be viewed as a breaking change. So as of this morning, when I checked on the issue queue, we have 2 PRs open that are feature additions, but both of which are good, strong PRs. And then there's 1 item on here that was something that was proposed as a relaxation of the current spec, and we thought we'd talk about it out loud before filing an issue about it. So let's see, 133, I think that one is yours, Jeremy, if you'd like to summarize that one really quickly. I'm turning into that guy who knows what the issue numbers are.
Yeah, I was double checking that was the one. So 133 is a proposal to add outputs to the spec, similar to parameters and credentials. For getting things into a bundle, we see a need to get things out of a bundle once an invocation image is run. These could be things like if you're making a Kubernetes cluster, producing the kube config that goes along with that so that somebody can actually use the cluster. It could be anything that gets generated during the the invocation image runtime for like an install or an update. We don't have that in the spec right now, so we think that it makes sense to have a standardized way of doing that. So take a look at that. It relates to issue 132. It's been open for about a week, and Simone from Docker commented. I think he was mostly cool with it. So take a look at it. If you think that it would cause any problems for what you're building, add comments there. But we think it opens up a couple of cool use cases like chaining things together, but mostly it addresses the need to get something out of the invocation image once it runs.
And then the other one that's kind of in the queue is Glenn's issue entitled Include Original Image Names and Image Map. I think Glenn was here, but I think he was having connection problems, and so he may bounce in and out. But in the meantime, I'll sort of summarize it. So we've been trying to figure out how best to handle the case where you need to rewrite an image reference inside of a bundle. And we've gone through several cycles on this. We kind of had a false start with this idea of having references and rewriting rules inside of the bundle.json, but that was very, very burdensome. Simone and probably Sylvain, I think, was also involved in this one, came up with an idea of how to do it inside of a bundle, and Docker Apps has been supporting that actually for 3 or 4 months now, at least, because I saw the demo of it at DockerCon. And that's actually turning out to be a really productive way of doing it. So we kind of switched over to move down that path. And in doing so, Glenn pointed out that we lost the original image reference, and so had suggested adding the original image reference back in, so that basically you can do a find and replace on the image references. This to me seems like a very sound proposal, as is often the case when you get a bunch of engineers to comment on issues. With the number one most discussed feature seems to be what we should name that particular field, but I think largely we're converging on that. I was hoping Glenn would be able to give us a feeling for whether he felt confident in the PR at this point, but I think we could probably merge that one today and be done with that. So so if there are any feelings about that, now would be a great time to open up that issue in GitHub and leave some comments on that. Anybody else have any, before we go on to the next one, does anybody else have issues in the issue queue that haven't yet been transformed to pull requests, but that would be breaking changes if we delay another week to implement them? I know we have several additive changes, including some deeper support for data structures and things like that. But if there are any ones that would be breaking that would change the format, now would be the time to bring them up. Okay, I'm going to jump one in the agenda because I forgot about the summary of changes. So one proposal that was brought up yesterday was we're starting to see different libraries emerging for CNAB support. So Gareth wrote a Python library, Radu wrote a .NET library, and I started writing a Rust library. And what we are collectively discovering is that canonical JSON is not a terribly well supported encoding. So as we looked at, so the purpose for using canonical JSON over regular Douglas Crockford style JSON was that canonical JSON has a desirable property that when you generate a checksum of it, a digest of it, it's repeatable. So you can digest a file, read it in, serialize it out, digest it again, and it should be the same. As long as you didn't change any of the content, it should be the same. So it formalizes the white space, it formalizes the ordering of keys, and it formalizes how certain data types are formatted. That is all very well and good, except that without other libraries supporting it, it's getting hard to write things without writing custom JSON encoders. So the suggestion was made that since largely the hashing is part of the security spec, and that also hashing could be delegated entirely to a runtime in runtime operation, that perhaps we would loosen the specification so that instead of saying you must encode into JSON schema, we would relax it to you should encode in, must encode in canonical JSON to you should encode in canonical JSON. And that'd allow some libraries to be able to do that. And then as we do the security spec, I'll change the wording in there to say, here's the algorithm for canonicalizing before generating a digest. And to be compliant with the security spec, CNAB runtimes would have to do that. But CNAB tooling in the middle would not necessarily have to be aware. Okay, deep breath. Does that kind of make sense? And does anybody immediately have any objections to that idea?
That sounds reasonable. I think we shouldn't be checking the signature of decoded JSON though. So, you know, the thing I'm imagining in my head is we encode something, we store it in binary format, we sign that, and then you check the signature against that before you decode it. So it shouldn't be a problem. I think relying on being able to check the signature of something that's deserialized and reserialized feels wrong anyway.
It's like a little bit too late to do that.
Yeah, sorry. Also, if you've started writing your own JSON encoding library, you know you've probably taken the wrong turn somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Radu is agreeing violently. Okay. Yeah, so one of the questions was, should the image section be an array rather than a map? And originally it was an array, and we switched it to a map for rewriting support. I don't know, Chris or Sylvan, you might best be able to explain why it is in that particular shape right now.
Which one? Let me just read the question.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a map, so we can replace them at runtime, if I remember correctly, Sylvain?
Yeah, I think that's for the image map support. Can't remember the exact reason.
I think it was something to do with, so taking the Docker app example where we're using Compose, we have image names inside the Compose file. What we want to do is move the whole CNAB from one repo to another one. Each time you push the CNAB, we're pushing all the service images as well. And so when you move it to a different repo, the name of the image would have changed because the repo prefix would have changed. And so what we need to do is we need to do a find replace on the original name and the final name, or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
Or the move name.
Yeah.
And the reason why I brought it up is because that actually bit me. I was trying to write a custom duffle.json, and having that inconsistency between invocation image and the images section wasn't very helpful, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I actually made the same mistake when I was writing the Rust library. I described both of them as the same because I just forgot that they were different. But that is one that would be breaking. So if there's a good reason to change it, now is kind of our last moment.
If you have questions about that, the best people are Sylvain or Simon, who isn't on this call, but they're inside the Cloud Native Slack if you're not there. And so just reach out to them and they can help.
One point that I'd like to make here is to make the distinction between the schema that's defined by tooling and the schema that's defined by the bundle JSON. There's nothing stopping duffle JSON or Docker app schema to define the image map, the image currently that's a map in the bundle JSON as an array in their descriptor. It would be masking what's happening in the bundle JSON, but tooling can always choose to define the images in another way.
Won't that make the tool incompatible with the spec, though?
Not necessarily. So as long as the bundle output is compatible with the spec, then it's fine. Porter has a YAML schema and it outputs bundle JSON file. So it's not necessarily that the tool has a subset of the bundle as an input.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so for that particular one, probably the best thing to do would be to bring it up in Slack, and if consensus arises that we may have made a mistake, we can transform that into an issue and try and get that in. Yeah, Simone is probably as the committer of that change in the spec, Simone is the best one to talk to about it. Okay, thanks for bringing that up. Jeremy, with the, do you want to summarize the changes document that you dumped in here? We've been trying to, every week, summarize what the changes in the spec were that week so that people who don't have the time to watch every single PR get merged can get kind of a bird's eye view. So Jeremy can summarize that for us.
Sure. So this document will be kept up to date as we merge things through. The only big change, there was a breaking change that removed refs from the specification. That was 123. The others were smaller changes. So you can take a look at those. But as you're updating tooling, this document's kind of intended to help you understand what things are in flight and what have been merged in the previous week. But it was a pretty light week compared to the week before.
And I just dropped a link to that document directly. Okay, so two other issues have popped up in the agenda. One is plans for duffle rewrite, and second one is should custom extensions be exposed to invocation image. Plans for duffle rewrite, I don't know who added that, but if you'd like to introduce it and talk about it. Uh-oh, it was Glenn who then dropped off the call. Change tracking is useful. Okay.
I added it, but I can speak to that as well a little bit. what we are trying to do is, so I work with Glenn on at Pivotal on Riff and PFS basically, and so we're trying to solve this image relocation problem. Our initial approach was to do it in a base bundle, do the relocation basically, and more and more, I think the consensus is that it should not belong to the base bundle, but be a runtime provided thing. And so to that end, we were wondering if there was an open issue about duffle rewrite, and we just were curious if it's been planned to work on it, and if the relocation thing is becoming a platform provided thing, then does it need a mention in the non-normative section of the spec as well?
Don't think it's a duffle. I think we do it in Docker app though. Would it make sense to upstream that? I don't know. Maybe we can investigate that.
Yeah, so the current momentum on that, and Jeremy is the author of the duffle rewrite command, so feel free to jump in and correct me. But the current momentum on that has been to change the responsibility of rewriting from the CNAB runtime, the external tool, into the run tool, the tool that runs inside of the invocation image. I'm pretty sure that's how Docker app has been doing it all along, which is a little bit easier for one with an opinionated base bundle, but a little bit harder for the more general cases that we're dealing with. So, go ahead.
That's the case. We have a PR that's open back from November that probably should get closed, but it was there for like historical purposes, and we had changed how the image references exist in the bundle, like in the bundle itself. So it's a little out of date in terms of that. But that's what the PR, which is number 489, was the way we were thinking about it originally, where it would be in the runtime, like duffle. And I think we've settled on that it should be in the invocation image itself, kind of like what Docker's doing.
Yeah, so that the PR against the spec 137 that Glenn had opened, it feels like the last necessary change before we can provide a generic way to do find and replace inside of an invocation image. This might be an interesting area to investigate doing a Porter mix-in that would allow this somehow. But if we go the route of requiring the run tool to do it, then duffle probably won't have anything built in, because the reference implementation-ness of that particular tool would indicate that it shouldn't necessarily handle that case. That would be unhelpful, because then we wouldn't have any examples. So maybe some other tools would be able to provide generic tooling or something like that would be able to do this. It's probably a disappointing answer, but that's kind of where we are at this point.
Okay, cool, thanks.
And then the last one on there was, should custom extensions be exposed to invocation images? I am assuming this is the contents. Oh, so is this, and Swapnali might be able to clarify, because this also came from Glenn, it looks like. Was it the idea here that the custom field would be exposed into the invocation image so that it could parse that data and use it to make decisions about things inside of the run tool?
I actually am not aware of this particular thing.
Okay. That one would be a very good, if that's what he's thinking, that might be a very helpful suggestion. So if he wants to formalize that into an issue, we can talk about that next week. Jeremy, do you want to bump that one to next week so we can revisit that? All right, any other things people would like to talk about this week?
I've just got a follow-up from last week. We talked about that we're going to follow up on Radu's PR to remove the Docker socket. We did that, and we included things so you can put your own host config. We have to do a little bit of magic inside Docker app to make it so it works nicely on a local Docker desktop, but you can have a look at what we've done there to do that. So yeah, I think it is the right direction, though. We shouldn't be running invocation images as root unless we need to as well. So that's maybe we could just put that in the best practices doc or something.
Yep. All right, anything else? All right, so do we feel like we're in a fairly good place regarding the state of the CNAB Core 1.0 working draft spec? Is anybody here feeling like they're blocked without having something in the spec, and that block would require a breaking change? I know there's some additive changes that we can keep working on. But. All right, so I think at this point we'll consider the spec to be in a kind of slushy sort of stage where we will attempt to not introduce any breaking changes between now and, let's just say, beginning of June, and we can revisit this in the beginning of June to see if we've made it. And that should be around the time that I'm optimistic that we'll be getting pretty close to exiting working draft stage by that point. And we'll have something that we can just stamp as the spec and continue on with the 1.1 implementation of CNAB Core and also getting those other 3 specs done. So if that sounds good to everybody, I think we should just make that the output of the meeting and move on. Silence means you agree, so all right, so that sounds good. Anything else? Otherwise, we can end a little bit early and reconvene next week to keep going on some of these interesting. Hopefully, we'll have 133 ready for more discussion and a couple new issues that we can talk through. Anybody want to do a demo next week? Anybody know you've got a demo you'd like to give? Okay, if anybody decides during the week that you want to do one, just drop a message in Slack or go directly into this the HackMD document that I'm pointing to, even though it makes no sense for me to point to a screen that you can't see. And we can make that happen. All right, have a great week. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week.
Thanks. Cheers.